The cello story, expanded voiceover script. My parents sold my 11-year-old daughter's antique cello, the one that her great-grandmother had personally gifted to her for $87,000. They didn't ask. They didn't warn us. They just took it. And then they spent every single dollar of that money on a swimming pool for my sister's children. When my grandmother found out what they had done, she didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply smiled, and that smile was far more dangerous than any tears could have been. I knew something was wrong before we even stepped through the front door. You can sense a renovation the way you can sense a lie. It has a particular smell to it. Fresh paint. Sawdust. That sharp, chemical odor that tells you someone has spent a significant amount of money and chose not to mention it to you. It hangs in the air like a confession nobody is ready to make. My daughter Lucy climbed out of the car carrying her backpack, her music binder, and her small tin of rosin. Her bag was light because the most important thing, the thing that actually mattered, was already inside the house. The antique cello had been stored at my parents' house for a very good reason. My apartment was small, the walls were thin, the neighbors were not music enthusiasts, and an instrument of that value and age required careful, controlled conditions. It lived in my grandmother's old music room, which had always been maintained with a humidifier, proper temperature control, and a cabinet lock, because my grandmother was not a naive woman. Lucy had been looking forward to her practice session all day, not in the reluctant, dragging her feet way some kids approach their lessons. This was different. She had been humming under her breath during the entire drive over, tapping out rhythms on her knees with her fingers, already slipping into that focused, private world she disappears into whenever music is near. She loved that cello the way some children love a best friend, completely, and without needing a reason. "Do you think great-grandma will be there today?" she asked, pulling her ponytail tighter as we walked toward the door. "She's at her new place," I told her. "We'll call her later." Lucy nodded, but her eyes stayed hopeful anyway. She had this quiet, stubborn kind of optimism that I both admired and found heartbreaking in equal measure, the kind that keeps expecting people to be better than they have proven themselves to be. We walked up to the front door. I had a spare key, not because my family trusted me particularly, but because I was useful to them. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. Being trusted gets you love. Being useful gets you access codes and a list of errands. The moment I pushed open the door, I heard it, the muffled whine of power tools somewhere deeper in the house. And the smell hit me again, stronger this time. Definitely paint. Definitely money. Definitely a decision that had been made without consulting anyone who might have raised a reasonable objection. Lucy's face lit up. "Are they fixing the music room?" she asked, already moving toward the hallway. I didn't answer right away. My brain was doing that slow, frustrating thing it does when reality doesn't match the version of events you were expecting. I stood there for a moment, trying to process the blue painter's tape along the entryway, the cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, the plastic tarp laid down over the hallway runner like the house was being prepared for something serious. Lucy tiptoed forward like she was walking through a museum. I followed her gaze toward the back window and felt my stomach drop. The backyard had been completely excavated. The grass was gone. The earth had been peeled open and rearranged into something entirely new. A large rectangle had been carved out of the ground, with rebar lining the edges, stacks of pavers nearby, and piles of displaced dirt sitting like small brown mountains. The shape was unmistakable. A pool, a full in-ground swimming pool. "Is that for us?" Lucy asked. There was so much hope in her voice that I felt a surge of anger so fierce it nearly took my breath away. Not at her, never at her. At every single adult in my family who had decided that her hope was an acceptable thing to use and discard. "I don't know," I said carefully. "Let's go get your cello." We walked down the hall toward the music room. It had always been my grandmother's sanctuary. Even when she lived with my parents, she had transformed that room into something sacred. Temperature controlled, humidity managed, shelves lined with old sheet music, a lock on the cabinet because she had lived long enough to know that love does not automatically protect your things from people who want them. Lucy loved being in that room. She once told me it smelled like wood polish and peppermint tea. I told her it smelled like someone who still believed in boundaries. We were both right. I pushed open the door. The humidifier was still running. The stand was still there. The shelves were still organized exactly as they had always been. But the corner, the specific corner where the cello case had always rested, the corner that belonged to Lucy in the same way a bedroom belongs to a child, was empty. Not misplaced, not moved to another room, empty. Lucy didn't scream. She didn't even gasp. She simply stopped walking, stood very still, and then moved toward the corner slowly and deliberately, the way you might approach something you're afraid of disturbing. She looked down at the empty floor. She looked behind the chair. She checked the shelf above, as though the cello might have somehow rearranged itself in the night. Then she turned to look at me, and her voice was so careful and so small that I felt it like a bruise. "Did great-grandma change her mind?" she asked. "No," I said. "Then where is it?" She didn't sound angry. Anger would have been easier. She sounded cautious, like the question itself might get her into trouble. Her fingers drifted toward the edge of the stand, reaching out of habit, expecting to feel the warm, familiar curve of wood. When there was nothing there, she pulled her hand back quickly, as though she had touched something hot. Her eyes went glassy, but she didn't let anything fall. She just nodded once, too hard, too deliberate, like she was forcing herself to keep it together. I told her to stay in the music room. I needed her not to see my face when I got the answer I was already dreading. I walked directly to the kitchen. My mother was there, of course. She was always in the kitchen when she wanted to appear as though she was holding the family together with sheer willpower and love. She had a coffee mug in one hand and her phone in the other. Her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had been busy, which in our family almost always meant she had been busy deciding things without telling anyone who might disagree. My father was at the kitchen table scrolling through his tablet with the calm, unhurried energy of a man who genuinely believes the world will always make room for him. My sister Rachel was perched on a stool sipping something expensive and green, and she didn't look up when I walked in. She rarely did. "Where is Lucy's cello?" I asked. My mother blinked slowly, as though I had interrupted something important by asking about something inconvenient. "Good morning to you too, Emily," she said. I stared at her without moving. My father sighed, the deep, theatrical kind that says he already considers this conversation beneath him. "What's the problem now?" he said. "Lucy's cello," I repeated. "Where is it?" Rachel snorted without glancing up. My mother took a slow sip of her coffee. "Your father handled it," she said. Handled it? That phrase is a red flag dressed in casual clothing. Handled it implies a decision was made, consequences were not considered, and someone is hopping you'll accept the passive voice and move on. "Handled it how?" I said. My father finally looked up from his tablet. "We sold it." The room went strange and quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful at all. It's the quiet of a room holding its breath. "You sold it," I repeated. "Yes," my father said, in the same tone one might use to explain a utility bill. "It was valuable. It was just sitting there. Your grandmother wasn't using it." "It wasn't hers," I said. "It was Lucy's. Grandma gave it to Lucy." Rachel laughed. "She's 11. My mother set her mug down with a small, deliberate clink. "Emily, don't start." "Don't start," I repeated. "You sold my daughter's cello." My father leaned back in his chair, already wearing the expression of a man who has decided he is being victimized by someone else's emotions. "It was a family asset," he said. "No," I said, and my voice was sharper now. "It was set aside for Lucy. Grandma was very clear about that." Rachel finally looked up. Her eyes were bright with the specific kind of irritation that comes from being confronted with something you already know is wrong. "And my kids are what? Chopped liver," she said. "Ben and Olivia deserve things too." Ben and Olivia were not even in the room, and somehow they were still the main characters of the story. My mother gestured toward the backyard with a small, generous wave of her hand, as though she were presenting a gift. "We're doing something nice for the children," she said. "The children," she said again, letting the phrase sit there like it was self-explanatory, like it was an argument all on its own. Ben and Olivia deserve space, my father added. And Lucy doesn't, I said. My father rubbed his forehead with the slow patience of someone who has been waiting for this conversation to end since before it began. Lucy will be fine with a student cello. You can rent one. Plenty of kids do. Lucy will be fine. That is my family's favorite prayer. It means, we did what we wanted, we're not interested in your feelings, and we're counting on you to make peace with it so we don't have to feel guilty. It is not comfort. It is a dismissal wearing the costume of reassurance. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the counter and forced them still. Who did you sell it to? I asked, quieter now. Where is it? My father shrugged. A collector. He paid by wire transfer. It was a quick sale. Of course it was. My mother's eyes sharpened. And before you get any ideas, you are not telling your grandmother about this. I looked at her. She doesn't need the stress, my mother said, her voice clipped and final. She's settling into her new facility. She's being looked after by professionals. Let her have peace. You mean let you have peace, I said. My father's expression hardened. Don't make this about you. I laughed once short, and without any warmth in it at all. I went back to the music room. Lucy was still standing in the empty corner, her fingers hovering near the edge of the instrument stand as though some part of her still couldn't accept what her eyes were telling her. I knelt down and took her hands in mine. We're going home, I said. She nodded without arguing. That was the hardest part. She didn't fight it. She didn't cry out or demand an explanation. She just folded into herself quietly, the way children do when they have already learned that making too much noise about your pain causes more trouble than it's worth. As we walked toward the front door, my mother called after me from the kitchen. Emily, do not call your grandmother. Do you hear me? I heard her. I just didn't care anymore. And that was the moment I knew exactly what I was going to do. That night, Lucy practiced on a battered student cello that her music teacher had lent us for emergencies. It sounded thin and hollow, like music being played through cardboard. Lucy didn't complain. She adjusted her posture the way her great-grandmother had taught her, focused herself, and tried again. Every time the sound came out flat and wrong, she blinked hard, that particular blink she had developed for moments when she needed to hold something inside rather than let it escape. I stood in the doorway pretending I was just passing by, just casually looking in, like this was an ordinary evening and my child hadn't just been robbed of something that had been specifically chosen and saved for her. After a while, Lucy set the bow down in her lap and stared at her hands. I can still practice, she said quietly. It's just harder. I know, I told her. She nodded slowly. Maybe great-grandma didn't mean for it to be mine yet. Maybe I misunderstood. Something inside me went very still when she said that. She was trying to find a version of the story where no one had done anything wrong to her. She was protecting the adults who had taken something from her by rewriting the events so that it was possibly her own misunderstanding that had caused the loss. She was 11 years old, and she was already an expert at making herself smaller to absorb the failures of the people around her. Lucy had spent countless hours in my grandmother's music room over the past year and a half, learning in a way that I was not capable of giving her myself, not because I didn't love her, but because love doesn't automatically come packaged with musical talent, and the talent had simply skipped a generation. My grandmother had it. Lucy had it. I was the graceful middle ground where neither lived particularly strongly. The universe, in its infinite organizational logic, had apparently decided not to concentrate all the gifts in one basket. My grandmother used to sit beside Lucy on the bench and correct her bow grip with 2 gentle fingers and a single meaningful look. She would say things like, "Your left hand is talking too loudly," which would make Lucy giggle, and then she would fix it immediately. She praised her the way that children genuinely need to be praised, specifically, honestly, with precision. Better. That was better. Not the hollow kind of praise that comes while the praiser's eyes are still on their phone. Not the empty good job that means nothing and teaches nothing. The kind that says, I am paying attention to you, I can see what you are working toward, and you are getting there. In my parents' house, Lucy had always been required to occupy the least possible amount of space. If she laughed too loudly, my mother would say, Inside voice, sweetheart, with a smile that started and stopped at her mouth. If my nephew Ben shouted across the house, my father would laugh and say, "That boy has lungs on him." If my niece Olivia demanded to be the center of attention, Rachel would scoop her up like she was presenting a small celebrity to an adoring public. If Lucy needed anything at all, patience, acknowledgement, basic recognition, it was treated as an imposition on the natural order of the household. Lucy had learned to take up less space the way other children learn multiplication. Quietly, thoroughly, and without anyone commenting on how much it was costing her. My grandmother had noticed. She didn't always intervene directly. Family politics are their own kind of minefield, and she was still my mother's mother, which meant she had to navigate carefully. But she had done something quieter and more lasting. She had carved out a small territory where Lucy did not have to apologize for existing. That territory was the music room. It was practical as well as meaningful. My apartment was genuinely not suitable for an antique instrument, and the controlled conditions in that room were genuinely necessary for the cello's preservation. But it was also, quietly and intentionally, a gift. A place that said, "You belong here, your talent is real, and someone sees it." My grandmother had not been casual about any of it. She had the cello appraised. She had it photographed. She had the serial numbers documented. She had the paperwork organized into a file that she showed me once, sitting at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on, tapping the cover page with one finger. "This is not just sentimental," she said. "It is valuable, and people get strange around valuable things." I nodded because she was right. I just hadn't imagined that the people she meant were my own parents. My grandmother had moved into an assisted independent living community less than a week before the cello disappeared. My mother had described it, at various points during the preceding months, as perfect, and so much safer, and really the best thing for everyone. That last phrase, the best thing for everyone, had always been doing a lot of invisible work in our family. My mother had spent the better part of a year making small, steady comments. "This is getting hard. She needs professional care. It isn't fair to all of us." The us in that sentence had always managed to exclude me, despite the fact that I was the one who had actually been showing up consistently. My grandmother had not left in protest. She had left with a straight spine and a quiet dignity, the way she approached most things that were difficult. But once she was gone, the energy in that house shifted in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. The last set of eyes that mattered had left the room, and my family, freed from the presence of the one person whose opinion had any real weight, did what they had always been quietly waiting to do. They took. Lucy went to bed early that night. She didn't ask to call my grandmother. She didn't complain or demand explanations. She hugged me goodnight with both arms, pressing close like she was using my ribs for structural support. After she fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet and stared at my phone for a long time. I kept returning to what my mother had said. "Don't tell your grandmother," not "don't upset her," not "she's fragile right now." Don't tell her. As though the truth were a weapon I was being asked to surrender for their comfort. As though keeping my grandmother in the dark was something I owed them as a condition of being part of this family. I realized something sitting there that night, and it wasn't a comfortable realization. I had spent most of my life working very hard not to be difficult. I had confused being easy with being loved. I had made myself small and agreeable and manageable, and I had mistaken the relief on other people's faces for affection. It wasn't. It was just convenience, and I was not going to teach Lucy that lesson by example. The next morning, I drove to my grandmother's facility. It was a bright, tidy community that smelled of lemon cleaner and expensive hand soap. The staff member at the front desk smiled and asked who I was visiting with the serene professionalism of someone who has been trained to remain calm regardless of what walks through the door. "Margaret," I said. "Ah," she said warmly. "She's in the lounge. She's been expecting you." Of course she had. My grandmother was in an armchair with a book in her lap, and her glasses perched at the end of her nose, giving the author the kind of focused, skeptical look she reserved for people who were trying to get away with something. She looked up the second I walked into the room. "Sit," she said. "Your face is doing that thing." I sat down across from her and told her everything. I kept it factual. The empty corner in the music room, the excavation in the backyard. The words my father had used, family asset, quick sale. The words my mother had used, let her have peace. The look on Lucy's face when she had reached for the cello stand and found nothing there. My grandmother listened without interrupting, the way people listen when they are not just hearing but cataloging. When I finished, she closed her book with a slow, deliberate movement. "And Lucy," she said. "She went quiet," I told her. "She asked if you had changed your mind about giving it to her." My grandmother's expression didn't crumple. It didn't dissolve into sadness or shock. It sharpened, not into rage, into clarity, the way a lens comes into focus. "She thought it was her fault," my grandmother said softly. "Yes." My grandmother exhaled through her nose, one short, controlled breath, like releasing pressure from a valve. Then she looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "When did you last see the documentation file?" she asked. The cello documentation, the appraisal, the photographs, the serial identifiers. "Months ago," I said. "You showed it to me." "Good," she said. She leaned forward slightly. "Do you have anything showing the timeline? Texts about the pool, photographs of the construction, anything that shows the renovations began immediately after I moved out?" "I can screenshot Rachel's posts," I said, because of course Rachel had been posting. Rachel could document her own funeral if the natural lighting was flattering enough. There had been construction updates, progress photos, captions about transformation and making memories. My grandmother nodded. "Do that," she paused. "Emily, are you all right?" "I'm worried about you," I said. "Are you okay?" My grandmother looked at me over her glasses with the patient expression of someone who has been asked an unnecessary question. "I am not the one who should be worried," she said. Then she reached for her phone. I didn't ask who she was calling. She had always kept her cards close in a way my family had always mistaken for sweet, old-fashioned modesty. It wasn't modesty. It was strategy. She made a short, quiet phone call, spoke in a low voice and hung up. Then she looked at me. "I will handle it," she said. "How?" I asked. She gave me a small, measured smile. "Not with yelling," she said, which in our family, given the circumstances, was essentially a miracle of restraint. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "Lucy is going to get her cello back." My throat tightened. "How can you be certain?" "Because it was never theirs to sell," she said. I froze. She watched my face carefully, choosing what to reveal and what to hold back, the way she had always done. "Not today," she said gently. "I will explain when the moment is right. Go home, be with your daughter. Let her practice. Let her feel normal in whatever way she can for now." I stood to leave. "What about my parents?" I asked. My grandmother's smile this time was small and did not reach her eyes. "Let them enjoy their pool," she said. I drove home feeling like I had stepped into a room where the barometric pressure had quietly and significantly changed. 6 weeks passed. Lucy practiced on the rental cello her teacher had sourced at a discount, and then on a second rental we pieced together from our own budget. Neither of them was right. The sound didn't bloom the way it had with the antique instrument. It didn't fill the room, didn't vibrate with that particular richness that made people stop what they were doing and listen. Lucy adjusted to it anyway, because Lucy was the kind of child who adapted even in circumstances where no adaptation should have been required of her. The worst part was the quiet. She stopped humming in the car. She stopped tapping rhythms on her knees. She still practiced every day, still focused and precise and determined, but something in her had gone a little more careful, a little more guarded, as though she had learned a new rule about the world and hadn't yet decided how to feel about it. Meanwhile, my parents posted construction updates like dispatches from an important project. Rachel shared photos of Olivia holding a small inflatable flamingo and Ben wearing swim goggles, with captions about making memories and about every sacrifice being worth it. No mention of the cello. No acknowledgement that a child's instrument had been converted into chlorine and concrete. Just shining faces and a large, blue, finished pool. Then the invitation appeared in the family group chat. A barbecue, Saturday at 2 in the afternoon, pool reveal, bring a side dish, hope you can make it. The exclamation points at the end made it worse somehow. Lucy saw it over my shoulder. Her face stayed carefully blank. "Are we going?" she asked. I opened my mouth and didn't have an answer. My grandmother called the next morning. "We're going," she said. "Grandma," I said carefully, "what are you planning?" Her voice was entirely calm. "I'm doing what I should have done considerably earlier," she said. She cut off my next question before I could ask it. "Emily, I don't want Lucy watching you swallow this, and I don't want her to think silence is the correct response to being wronged." "Okay," I said. There was a pause, then, "It's in motion." "The cello." "Yes." My heart kicked hard against my ribs. "What does that mean? When? How?" "You will find out soon enough," she said. Saturday was the kind of hot that makes the air feel like warm, wet cloth pressed against your face. Perfect pool weather. Perfect look at everything we have built and be grateful for being included weather. Lucy wore her swimsuit underneath her clothes because she was 11 and hope is stubborn in 11-year-olds. She didn't talk much on the drive over. Neither did I. When we pulled up to the house, the street was lined with cars. People I recognized from every holiday gathering, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, the kind of crowd my family assembled when they wanted an audience. The backyard looked like a feature spread in a home design magazine. The water was blue and still and gleaming under the afternoon sun. The new stone deck was immaculate. Someone had strung lights across the pergola. Ben was already in the water, cannonballing with great enthusiasm and no awareness of consequences. Olivia was floating serenely on an inflatable, wearing small sunglasses, looking like a miniature celebrity at a resort. Rachel was holding a drink and laughing at something someone had said, the kind of loud, expansive laugh that is partly genuine and partly performance. My mother stood near the grill in her best hosting posture, radiating the particular satisfaction of a woman whose plans have come together exactly as intended. My father stood nearby with a wide, validated smile, the expression of a man who has decided that this pool represents the culmination of many good choices. And then Lucy and I walked through the gate. My mother's smile flickered, just for a fraction of a second, not because she was surprised we had come, but because our presence was a complication she had not fully accounted for, and complications irritated her. "Emily," she said, bright and perfectly pitched, "you made it." "Hi, Mom," I said. Rachel looked Lucy up and down. "Hey," she said. Lucy nodded politely and quietly and stood beside me with her towel folded carefully in her hands. Not quite sure where to put herself. Her eyes moved across the pool, across the new deck furniture, across everything that her cello had been converted into. She swallowed once, hard. I put my hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it without looking at me. And in that moment, I understood with complete clarity why I was there. Not for revenge, not to create a scene. I was there because my daughter needed to see what happens when you don't simply absorb the cost of other people's choices and smile and ask if they'd like more potato salad. My father called for everyone's attention with a clap of his hands. My mother laughed and began a small speech about how long this had been in the planning, and how wonderful it was to finally have a backyard the whole family could enjoy, and how grateful they were to be surrounded by the people they loved. Rachel raised her glass. Applause rippled through the gathered relatives. Someone made a warm comment about the water temperature. Ben did another cannonball. Lucy's fingers tightened around her folded towel. Then someone near the back said, "Where's Margaret? Isn't she coming today?" My mother's smile pulled tight. "She's busy," she said quickly. "She sends her love." And then the back gate clicked open. I turned. My grandmother walked in. She was not in a wheelchair. She did not look fragile or uncertain. She wore a crisp blouse and dark slacks, and her posture was the kind that takes a lifetime to develop, straight and unhurried and completely without apology. Beside her walked Andrew, her attorney and longtime friend, carrying a slim manila folder. The backyard went quiet in the way. A crowd goes quiet when it senses something is happening, but cannot yet determine what kind of something it is. My mother's face drained of color. My father's smile locked in place and then slowly stopped being a smile. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. My grandmother stepped forward and surveyed the pool with a calm, appraising expression of someone evaluating work that was not done to their specifications. "Well," she said pleasantly, "you've certainly been busy." My mother forced a small laugh. "Mom, this is a party." "I know," my grandmother said. "That's precisely why I came." She looked at me, then at Lucy. Lucy straightened slightly, the way her spine seemed to recognize when safety had entered the room. Then my grandmother looked at my parents, and her voice was level and clear and carried effortlessly across the backyard. "I heard you sold the cello," she said. My mother's lips pressed together. "We didn't want to upset you." My grandmother raised one hand. "You didn't want consequences," she said. The word landed like a stone, dropped into still water. My father cleared his throat. "Let's take this inside and discuss it privately." My grandmother's expression remained entirely pleasant. "Oh, Thomas," she said, "you've had quite enough private time." A nervous ripple moved through the crowd. Someone shifted their drink from one hand to the other. Someone else became very interested in the contents of the grill. My grandmother turned slightly, addressing the assembled guests with the unhurried confidence of someone who has thought carefully about this moment and has decided it belongs to everyone present. "I won't keep you long," she said. "I know you're here to swim." Rachel snapped. "This is insane." My grandmother ignored her. She looked directly at my parents, and her voice was steady and quiet and absolutely clear. "The cello was held in trust for Lucy," she said. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. You could feel people leaning in without moving. "I am the trustee," my grandmother continued. "Lucy is the beneficiary. That instrument was not a family asset. It was not yours to sell. It was not yours to use. It was not yours in any sense of that word." My father stared at her, as though she had begun speaking in a language he hadn't realized she knew. Rachel's voice came out sharp and flushed. "You can't do that." "I can," my grandmother said, and the two words were enough. Andrew stepped forward and opened the folder. My grandmother didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on my parents because she wanted them to understand that she did not need the papers to know she was right. "I documented that instrument thoroughly," she said. "Appraisal, photographs, serial identifiers, insurance records, everything. Because I have been alive a long time and I have met a great many people." She paused briefly. "It turns out I am related to some of them." A few people laughed, the dry, involuntary kind of laugh that slips out before the person has decided whether it's appropriate. Dry humor does that. It finds its way in through the side door. My mother's voice shook. "We didn't know anything about a trust." "Correct," my grandmother said. "You didn't." My father found his voice. "Then where is the cello now?" My grandmother's smile was small and contained no warmth whatsoever. "Safe," she said. Lucy's head snapped up. My grandmother looked at her directly, the way she had always looked at Lucy, as though she was the most important person in the room, because at that moment she was. "It was recovered this morning," my grandmother said, "after Andrew filed the appropriate documentation and made several calls." Lucy let out a sound, not a sob, not a cry, just a small, involuntary exhale, as though relief had been waiting inside her for 6 weeks and had finally found a way out. My grandmother looked back at my parents. "You sold something that did not belong to you," she said. "You took the money and you put it into—" She gestured at the pool with a single, unhurried motion of her hand. "This." Rachel's voice cracked. "It's for the kids." "Lucy is a child," my grandmother said. Rachel's mouth opened. She looked at Ben and Olivia splashing in the water as though they could shield her from the weight of what was happening. They couldn't. Andrew cleared his throat quietly. "Margaret," he said. My grandmother gave a small nod. Andrew stepped toward my parents, and then toward Rachel, and he held out the papers with the practiced calm of a professional who has delivered difficult news many times before. "Notice to vacate," he said without raising his voice. 60 days. My mother stepped back. No. Andrew did not move. He held the papers steadily, like a waiter presenting a check that has been owed for a long time. My mother's hands were trembling. My father's face had gone from pale to a flat, ashen gray. Rachel's voice went up sharply. You're kicking us out of this house. My grandmother tilted her head slightly. You seem surprised by this, she said. That's the part I genuinely don't understand. My mother's voice cracked. Mom, this is my home. My grandmother's expression remained entirely still. It is the house you live in, she said. The difference between those two sentences was the distance between a cliff edge and solid ground. I felt Lucy press closer to my side. I looked down at her. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She was doing that thing she always did, holding it in, keeping it contained, not wanting to make things harder for the adults around her. And so I said it, not loudly, not with heat or theater, clearly and calmly enough that anyone who was listening could hear it. Lucy is not second-tier family. My mother's face twisted. Emily. No, I said, not today. Rachel scoffed. So Lucy gets everything, is that it? She was getting a cello, I said. Her cello, the one that was given to her, that's it. My grandmother took 2 steps toward Lucy. Her voice softened, and the change in it was immediate and unmistakable. Sweetheart, she said, you didn't lose it. It was taken from you. There is a very important difference between those 2 things. Lucy's lip trembled. I thought, she started quietly, I thought I might have done something wrong. My grandmother's eyes flashed with something fast and fierce, a quick, bright anger, and then her face settled back into warmth. You did nothing wrong, she said. Not one thing. Andrew held the papers patiently. My father did not take them. My mother did not take them. Rachel finally snatched hers as though she could tear reality in half if she tried hard enough. My grandmother looked at my parents one final time. 60 days, she said. Her voice carried the same even, matter-of-fact quality it had carried throughout the entire afternoon. Then she added, very quietly, try me. And that was it. Not a theatrical speech. Not a collapse into emotion. Just a line drawn in ink that would not wash out. The backyard began to break apart the way crowds do when the thing they came to celebrate has turned into something else entirely. People gathered their things quietly. Children were called out of the pool. Relatives found excuses to be elsewhere. Drinks were set down. Conversations were abandoned mid-sentence. Someone's laugh arrived too late, realized its error, and stopped. Lucy watched Ben and Olivia still splashing in the water for another few minutes, because children do not understand adult consequences until the adults make it unavoidable. Then she looked up at my grandmother. Do I really get it back? She whispered. My grandmother nodded. Yes. Lucy let out a breath that she had apparently been holding for the better part of 6 weeks. The cello arrived the next day in a hard case that looked as though it had traveled through several sets of hands and had an opinion about the experience. My grandmother opened it with Lucy as though it were a ceremony, quietly, without hurry, with the kind of intentionality that says this moment matters and deserves to be treated as such. Lucy ran her fingers over the wood slowly, touching it the way you touch something you were afraid you'd never see again. She didn't say very much. She just turned to my grandmother and wrapped both arms around her, pressing her face against her shoulder, and held on. I watched my grandmother close her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel it, now that the part that required strength was over. My parents, in the weeks that followed, discovered one of the more inconvenient truths about selling something that does not belong to you. The buyer wants his money back. The collector who had purchased the cello was not interested in my mother's explanation. He was angry, he was embarrassed, and he had paid $87,000 for an instrument that had been recovered from him and was no longer in his possession. The phrase repayment plan entered my parents' daily vocabulary like a diagnosis. They couldn't pay him back in full. Most people can't, particularly people who have spent stolen money on concrete and chlorine. 60 days arrived faster than they had anticipated. My mother tried bargaining. My father attempted guilt. Rachel deployed rage. My grandmother did not move. Rachel did not end up coming to my parents' financial rescue, as some people might have expected. When consequences became real and immediate, Rachel remembered very efficiently how to create distance. The narrative shifted overnight. One day it had been, we all agreed this was the right decision. The next it was, I told them this was going to cause problems. Families with long practice at avoiding accountability can rewrite recent history with impressive speed. They moved out on a Tuesday into something smaller, something without a pool, something that reflected the actual size of what they had built rather than the size they had imagined for themselves. Ben and Olivia adjusted, the way children adjust to most things when the adults around them are steady. Lucy adjusted too, but in a different direction. She started speaking up. Small things at first. Actually, I was sitting there, and I don't find that funny, and no, I'm not okay with that. Simple, clear, direct. The first time she said it in front of my mother, who had come by for a brief, strained visit in the weeks after the move, my mother's mouth tightened as though she had tasted something bitter. Lucy noticed. She didn't apologize. Good. My grandmother, in the quiet weeks that followed, did what she had always done. She updated her affairs carefully, thoroughly, and without announcement. One evening, she slid a folder across my kitchen table while I was making tea. Andrew has prepared everything, she said. I've put the house into a trust. I'll remain the trustee. You'll be the beneficiary. It's protected now. It will be yours eventually in the way it was always supposed to be. I looked at her across the table. Thank you, I said. It felt inadequate. She waved it off. It's not generosity, she said. It's just being careful. People get strange around valuable things. On the day my parents finished moving out, Lucy and I brought boxes to the house. There was no ceremony about it, just tape and cardboard and the quiet sound of rooms being reclaimed. The house felt different immediately, lighter somehow, less like a place where everyone was performing something and more like a place where people could simply be. The first night we slept there, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't heard in years. No construction sounds, no performative laughter filtering through walls, no heavy footsteps packing with the energy of possession, just the settling sounds of an old house and the particular silence that comes when something difficult is finally over. And then my grandmother moved back in, not as someone being managed, not as an inconvenience absorbed into someone else's life plan, as the person who had always belonged there, returning to the place she had built. Lucy helped her unpack with the focused energy of someone who understands that this is not just moving boxes, but restoring something that had been displaced. She carried sweaters and books and the small tin of peppermint tea from the car, each item placed carefully where it had always belonged. And then, on a regular Tuesday evening, my grandmother settled into her armchair in the living room while Lucy unpacked her cello in the middle of the floor, rosined her bow, adjusted her posture, and began to play. No one asked for the inside voice. No one's smile went tight. No one drifted past with a phone in their hand and half their attention elsewhere. The music filled the room, warm, resonant, alive, and the house received it in the way a house receives something it was built for. That spring, Lucy auditioned for the Regional Youth Orchestra. She got in. She performed her audition piece on her cello, the one that had been documented and protected and recovered and returned to her. And she played it the way you play something when you have been reminded that the people who matter will not let you lose what is yours. She played it knowing that when someone had tried to take her future and build a pool with it, the adults who were supposed to protect her had not told her to be quiet about it. They had not asked her to be grateful for the loss. They had not suggested she rent something inferior and move on. They had shown up. They had told the truth. They had made certain that she never had to apologize for taking up the space she was always supposed to occupy. And in the music room that Lucy had grown up in, the one that smelled like wood polish and peppermint tea, where her great-grandmother had once corrected her grip with 2 gentle fingers and a single look, my grandmother sat in her chair and listened, and smiled, and for once did not say a word. Some things don't need correction. They just need to be heard.